Hey guys, I want to talk to you about plastics in cold water. Now there's so many different kinds of soft plastics out there, and I want to go through a couple of them that are a little bit better in my experience in cold water versus warmer water. Okay, I have with me a couple of groups of plastics that I use in a little bit warmer water, and I want to show you some examples of those so you kind of can compare. So let's look at a little selection here that I have of some of my favorite plastics to throw when the water's, say, in the high 50s and above. This is a really good compact creature bait, and it's got these kicking appendages on it. It's also got a grub tail on it as well. It's got a lot of movement. So you got three actions on here that are moving around, and that's just a little unnatural in cold water. Just a little too much movement going on. It's a great bait. I love to throw it in warmer water, but when the conditions are just really cold, it's a little too much movement. You know, same thing with this worm, this ribbon tail worm. I mean, I've caught so many big fish on these worms, especially in the post spawn. The water's warm, you know, especially 60s, 70s, even in the summertime. But the cold water conditions, that water's below 50 degrees, and especially in the 40s, that's just way too much movement going on, especially with this hyperworm. You know, I use this, I swim it a lot, like a swim bait. I'll work it around docks, vegetation, pretty much anything. But I've never gotten bit on this bait when it's cold. It's just way too much movement going on. You know, lizards, a lot of people think lizards, awesome in the pre-spawn. They're good when you fish them slow. You know, water's in the high 50s, getting ready to hit the 60-degree mark post-spawn as well. But a lot of appendages moving around here. And when you're fishing cold water, it's super, super hard to fish this thing slow enough to actually get the appendages to move and still be effective. So these are the type baits that I'll fish in warmer water. They're great baits, but I usually stay away from them in the cold water conditions. Now, I've also got a selection of my favorite cold water plastics, and this is what we really want to focus on. So let's take a look at some of these. So here's some examples of baits I'm going to fish in the colder water. The water's below 50 degrees especially, but you know, low 50s. I'm going to start throwing around the soft plastics. If you notice, these are different because they don't have a lot of appendages on them, and a lot of them are just straight. They don't have a lot of movement to them. So it's very natural looking in the water. You can fish these very, very slow, and they still look natural. You know, a tube, that can be just about anything you want it to be. But you know, smallmouth are notorious for loving tubes, but largemouth also like them too, and they're great to crawl around the bottom. You can pitch with them. Yes, they can be an erratic bait, but when fish slow, just crawling around, they're a good cold water bait. Secondly, just a trick worm, and you know, there's so many different colors, there's different lengths in these, but the main thing about these is there's hardly any movement to it when you're fishing it, you know, weightless, or you know, on a Texas rig or on a shaky head, which is where most people like to throw it. It's just a stick is all it is, and this is going to be a great cold water bait. Not a whole lot of movement. It's thin. It's easy for a fish to eat, and it just gets bites. You know, same concept with a fluke or this magic shad here. I like it a lot. I like the spade tail. It gives it a kind of an action like a Cinco will when it falls down. Less of a darting action than a fluke, but just really good to fish slow. Just kind of twitch it every once in a while, letting it glide around close to the bottom. This is a great cold water bait. Also, you know, I don't have one in front of me, but a Cinco is very similar to both of these, and that's going to have the same effect. You know, moving more towards a craw or a creature style, I love to fish flippers, beavers. They really don't have a whole lot of movement. They don't have the appendages. Yes, they have a great profile, a great crawfish profile or bluegill profile, but they're not waving around and you know, moving a lot. You know, the grub here that I have, I do fish this in cold water a little bit. I fish it really slow though, and sometimes I'll throw it on a jig trailer as well, and maybe fish it just on a jig head by itself. I'll fish a straight tail grub sometimes too, but you can get away with just a short, small, compact grub as well, and just fish it slow. You don't want to fish these things very fast. You get that tail moving too much and it just looks unnatural to the fish. You know, I also fish a lot of jigs in cold water. I probably fish more jigs in cold water than I do plastics. I just feel that I get more bites with them, I get better bites. It's a more natural crawfish presentation a lot of times, and you know, shallow rocky areas around stumps and wood on sunny days. I fish them a lot. So let's look at some of the trailers that you pair that up with in cold water conditions as well. Finesse jigs are killer in the cold water, especially around rocky areas. They're just a small profile, easy looking crawfish bait to eat, or a little bluegill or something like that. But fish love these things in the wintertime around rocky areas. You know, I'll also fish a traditional flipping or casting jig around some wood. You know, if the sun's out, nice, calm, sunny day around some wood, I'll also throw a little flipping jig as well. But there's a couple different trailers here that I like to use in the colder water. And they really represent mainly crawfish. I've got the grub back in the mix. I'll put that on the finesse jig, and notice it's a little bit bigger, and these two trailers are a little bit bigger as well. What I'm trying to do is slow my bait down, slow that fall, slow the movement of the jig a little bit. You know, with no trailer, the jig is a really fast moving bait, you know, depending on your size here, but you know, this is a 3/8 ounce. If I didn't have a trailer on here, this thing would be hopping around pretty fast. So if I put a chunkier trailer, I'm gonna get a slower fall, slower movement out of the jig, and it's gonna be a little bit more natural for cold water. You're not gonna have a real snappy moving fish going around in that cold water. Okay guys, those are my top soft plastic picks for fishing in cold water conditions. Remember, fish slow, not a whole lot of movement on your trailers or your plastics, and I think you're gonna find yourself catching more fish. So I hope this tip helped you, and I'll catch y'all later. And I'll normally go with a 6:4 to 1 gear ratio reel. And I like that because when I'm casting a long ways, I still have that cranking speed at the end of my cast. It's not too fast where I don't overwork it in the cold time of the year. How to dial it in, basically. So we already got this thing installed, and this is the first time we're taking it out on the water, so I'm going to show you how I like to dial in the graph and a little bit getting started. So let's get out on the water and see what it looks like.